On this edition of Independent Sources, wage wars. What's really at stake in the bruising battle over raising New York City's living wage.
Kick-Started, a successful online fundraiser, helps launch an all-Spanish podcast with global reach.
And Soul to Soul, one of the oldest Yiddish theaters in New York City, gets a makeover. Welcome to Independent Sources. I'm Viano Ravinka.
And I'm Garry Pierre-Pierre. The fight to get a so-called living wage in New York City has been like a 12-round bout between two heavyweight fighters. Both fighters throwing their best blows, trying to get a knockout. In one corner, Mayor Mike Bloomberg and other opponents of the proposal that could raise the city's minimum wage from $7.25 to $11.50 in city-subsidized businesses. In the other corner, proponents of a higher mandated salary.
The mayor and others opposed to the increase feel that it could hurt businesses by making them pay unsustainable wages. However, those for the increase say that it will boost low-paid workers' buying power and help stimulate the economy.
Still, with all that said, the wage increase would only really affect between 400 to 500 people. Crain's New York reporter Daniel Massey joined us in studio, and Paul Sonn from the National Employment Law Project joined us via phone. We took a look at what was really at stake in this fight. Dan, so tell me, why is it raising the wages of workers who work at companies that receive subsidies from the city such a contentious issue?
It's been a contentious issue pretty much from the start. The business community in the city, particularly real estate, makes the argument that if they're forced to pay wages of a certain level, they won't be able to build projects. The projects will no longer be viable, and then we'll end up with the Kingsbridge Armory, which is empty in the Bronx right now. This whole discussion sort of stems from the Kingsbridge Armory. What happened there was they were going to redevelop the place into a mall, and the city refused to guarantee living wage jobs there, and so the council torpedoed the project. It was the first zoning issue that Mayor Bloomberg had lost on in his whole tenure as mayor. And it really, I think that's where the controversy started. And then the unions were able to get Chris Quinn on board with the bill. And the unions, they basically decided that they don't want to go project by project. In the past, like if they want to redevelop Willets Point, or if they want to redevelop Coney Island, each time there's a redevelopment project, the union has to fight for living wage requirements at those particular jobs. And so they were trying to, after Kingsbridge and how toxic that became, they were trying to get a broad bill that could cover the entire city and the scope of economic development.
And not just do it piecemeal from project to project. What's the problem with that?
Well, it's a lot of effort. Each time you have the same argument, and so the feeling is let's have one policy. If it's good for one project, it should be good for the rest. But the problem developed, when you say how did it become controversial, is the mayor is sort of diametrically opposed to this, and it's a philosophical thing. He's gone on the radio and compared these wage mandates to the policies of the former Soviet Union. In an unprecedented move last week, he gave a 20-minute address. There's a separate prevailing wage bill, which is very similar in scope to this living wage bill. And he went on 20 minutes basically detailing why he's going to veto this bill when it's passed. And basically he said this is not the way the free market works.
Paul, how much are we talking about here in terms of wages? And do employers have a valid argument?
The increase is quite modest. The living wage bill would set a very modest $10 plus a $1.15 health benefit standard for workers at companies that choose to voluntarily seek out taxpayer-funded assistance from the city. The prevailing wage bills would set a somewhat different and higher standard that's based on what the most large employers pay their janitors and security guards in large buildings in the city. Both are we believe very modest standards, and in fact are what on most large development projects the better employers pay. I think something that's been missed in this debate is I actually don't believe the mayor's reaction is truly driven by philosophy. I think there's actually kind of behind this debate is really a power struggle. And I just, to explain this, there are just 3 points that I think don't really add up. One is despite all the recent sort of rhetoric we've been hearing, one, the mayor signed into law in 2002 the nation's largest living wage law. It covers businesses that get contracts from New York City, and it covers 60,000 workers, and it's, by most accounts, has been operating effectively since then. Two, as Danny Massey noted, the Bloomberg administration has, on a project-by-project basis, already been negotiating basically identical wage standards to those included in the prevailing wage bill, in some cases the living wage bill, on individual projects, and they have been notwithstanding the recent claims that this somehow is inappropriately meddling with the free market. And then three, the mayor recently has also come out in support of increasing the state minimum wage, and he's actually been showing really terrific leadership on that issue. He has been at the front of that, support for that proposal, together with a lot of unexpected voices like Crain's New York Business and Bloomberg News. So I really think what's going on is not a philosophical disagreement about whether these standards make sense or are viable, since the Bloomberg administration's been using them on a project-by-project basis. I think this is actually a power struggle about control of
between
economic
whom,
development.
Paul? You mentioned that before. I'm intrigued by this power struggle. It's struggle between whom?
Between basically the city council and the mayor. I think the mayor and I think the real estate community don't want to set a precedent for the city council having any policy voice in the operation of the Economic Development Corporation and the city's economic development policy. Even though I think the standards being proposed here, especially after all the tweaks and negotiations, are quite modest, I think they view it as a slippery slope that ultimately would lead to the council, a more collaborative process in the council, which is the Democratic wing of city government, having more of a say. So I think they're trying to draw a line in the sand and resist it. And my sense is that the mayor's professional communications folks do not actually think his messaging around this is very effective, because it really is at odds with the administration's rhetoric around signing the living wage law and doing deal-by-deal standards. And I really think this desire to kind of not set a precedent for the city council playing any role with the Economic Development Corporation is really what lies at the heart of this.
Okay, thanks, Paul. Dan, last week you wrote a piece talking about the campaign from the opposition of this bill, and they've been kind of dormant. What sparked their interest finally?
I think it's really the real estate community that led the opposition on this. I mean, you had initially, you had Kathy Wild's Partnership for New York City. When Chris Quinn announced that she was going to pass this bill, they stood up there and hugged each other, and they said, okay, they had made some concessions. Some pretty steep concessions. I mean, the bill in its original scope was going to cover tenants at these projects. So, for example, if a Foot Locker opens up at a subsidized project, Foot Locker would have to pay its employees a living wage. And that was really contentious for real estate developers who said they'd never be able to lease out projects, and then they'd never be able to get financing for projects. And so that was cut out of the bill, and that, I think, really scaled it down to a significant point. And
before you go on,
yeah.
I was reading somewhere, I think it was in your piece, about 400 or 500 people are going to benefit from this. How many people are we talking about here?
On the living wage bill, the council estimates 600 people a year.
600 people a
year. Yeah, and I think the scope has greatly been diminished. But I think it's also kind of getting back to a little bit what Paul was talking about earlier. I think this is really, the argument on the opponent side is that it's a slippery slope. Okay, this version of the bill might only be 600, but once you pass this version later on, especially under a new mayor, and I think that's what the unions, the retail workers union, they didn't get what they really wanted, which was retail jobs to be covered on this. And I think that they're hoping that under a new mayor this can be strengthened. And I definitely agree that it's more about a power struggle here, because if you look at it, you look at projects like Willets Point, there are some wage mandates in there, but it wasn't the council that decided it. The mayor was able to go in and negotiate, and in times he would be able to exchange deals for support not exactly on the table, like I'm going to do this for support in an election, but he put a wage standard on Greenpoint Williamsburg, the redevelopments on the waterfront there, and then he got the endorsement from the Building Service Workers Union, and so he's used it to his advantage at times.
Paul, is this a catch-22?
Yeah, I think this is a long overdue step towards accountability in the city's economic development programs. It's New York has been a real laggard behind other cities that have incorporated local hiring and a focus on living wages as a key part of their economic development strategy. And it doesn't mean that they don't focus on attracting businesses to the city or building housing and other, meeting other needs, but they include good jobs for local residents as a key priority. And Los Angeles, under Mayor Antonio Villaraigosa, has been the real national leader in this regard. And so this is, I think, a key first step for putting some of these issues on the agenda of the Economic Development Corporation and building them into city policy. And I think, the hope is that with the next mayor, this will be a foundation for a broader, more comprehensive economic development strategy that meets the needs of working New Yorkers.
Well, Dan, City Council will pass this bill, and the mayor will veto it. Yeah. Then what?
Then the City Council will override the mayor's veto. They have enough votes to do that. They wouldn't, I think, be bringing the bill to this point if they didn't have the votes to do that. And then the mayor says that he'll sue to prevent it from being implemented. And it's not exactly clear what grounds he'll sue on. I think he's going to probably argue on a couple of different grounds, probably say that the council doesn't have the authority to do this. Again, in the past instances, it has been negotiated by the mayor's office. So I think that'll probably be his legal argument, but it's not exactly clear that that's what he's going to argue. It is clear that he will sue once the veto is overridden.
So, Paul, can the mayor actually win a lawsuit on this issue?
No, I don't believe so. And the mayor issued a veto letter that laid out his legal arguments last week, and it was interesting. The lead argument, the main argument he was pushing was that these two laws are tantamount to a minimum wage, to setting a minimum wage for New York City, which is something that the courts have ruled that the city does not have the power to do. But conversely, it's been long established that the city does have the power to establish wage standards for as part of discretionary deals that the city negotiates or contracts that the city awards. And this is very much in that vein. In fact, New York has, as we've noted, both already has a living wage law in the book for businesses that choose to seek city contracts and has been negotiating just this type of wage standards on economic development deals. And no one has said that the city didn't have the power to negotiate those standards. So that was the lead argument that they outlined in their letter. And it's also at odds with, the data showing this actually only applies to a small number of businesses that voluntarily choose to seek special tax breaks from the city. So we're pretty confident the courts will rule this is not a minimum wage. And there are a variety of other issues they'll likely raise, but the core thing is this is putting conditions on public money, city money, which is a core prerogative of city government.
Well, thank you very much, Paul.
Thank you. Take care.
Danny Massey, thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me, Garry.
When we come back, how the internet helped launch a new Spanish language podcast with a global perspective.
Before that, Abby Ishola has some other news.
Thanks, Garry. Here's a look at some headlines from the ethnic media. Unemployment in the Bronx is at an all-time high. Norwood News reports that the unemployment rate in the Bronx reached over 14% in February. That's the highest it's been in 2 decades. The Bronx also boasts the highest rates of joblessness in the state. James Brown, an analyst with the New York State Department of Labor, says the problem stems from the fact that the Bronx has a higher number of working-age people who haven't completed high school and who have a difficulty speaking English. Our Time Press reports that Bedford-Stuyvesant is a toss-up in the congressional race. Ron Howell, publisher of Our Time Press, writes that both Assemblyman Hakeem Jeffries and Councilman Charles Barron are vying to replace Ed Towns as Central Brooklyn's representative. But neither candidate has political roots in Bed-Stuy, since Jeffries represents Fort Greene and Barron comes from City Council in Brownsville. Howell, a longtime Bed-Stuy resident, says this new leadership is a rebirth for the district, which has changed from a black neighborhood marred by crime to a gentrified area. The Guatemalan community in Bensonhurst is growing. El Diario La Prensa reports that until 2000, Hispanics represented only 8.1% of the foreign-born residents in the area. But taking a look around Bensonhurst today, you'll find many Guatemalans at playgrounds and restaurants in the neighborhood, most coming from the High Plains area of the Central American country. From the forward, Israel has become the place to settle for a growing number of Jews. More American Jews are moving to Israel, and more Israelis living abroad are returning home. According to the U.S. Citizen and Immigration Services, the number of Israeli residents seeking to settle in the United States has fallen. The immigration data indicates that the trend is happening as a result of America's poor job market. And finally, the owner of a cafe in Harlem has turned to her patrons and a crowdfunding website to help her raise $10,000 to make improvements on her business. DNAinfo.com reports that the East Harlem Cafe has become sort of an informal community center that holds fundraisers, open mic nights, and other events. The owner, Michelle Cruz, plans to use the money to buy a juicer to make healthy drinks. She also plans to build a new display case so she can offer salads, yogurts, and foods for diabetics. So far, Cruz has raised over $2,000 on the popular crowdfunding website Indiegogo.com. Those were just a few headlines from the ethnic media. Back to Garry and Vianora.
Thanks, Abby. It's been just over a month since Radio Ambulante ended its successful drive on the crowdfunding website Kickstarter. The group raised over $46,000, surpassing its initial goal of $40,000 to launch the monthly program. The program is the brainchild of novelist Daniela Alarcón, journalist Annie Coreal, producer Martina Castro, and Carolina Guerrero.
The podcast will be heard in Spanish all around the world. The producers hope the program can fill the same niche as shows like This American Life and Snap Judgment do in English media.
I spoke with one of the founders, Annie Coreal, about the success of the Kickstarter campaign and the attempt to give new meaning to the term portable radio. Your program aims to showcase human interest stories from Latin America and the U.S., and you say that there's a need for this. Elaborate on that.
As far as we've found, there's no other sort of transnational storytelling radio program that covers all of Latin America and the U.S. Our hope is that because we all speak one language, that we speak Spanish, that there will be sort of a cross-pollination, that people here in the U.S. will be listening to stories in Latin America and vice versa, that people in Latin America will also be hearing the stories of immigrants in the United States.
And this is a program, a Spanish-speaking language program.
Yes, it will be all in Spanish. The idea is to have, it'll be a podcast available on our website, which is www.radioambulante.org. So people will be able to stream and download from the website initially. And then eventually we hope to also be able to distribute this on terrestrial radio.
Now, why Kickstarter?
We decided to, so I'll tell you a little bit about Radio Ambulante. It was the sort of brainchild of a writer, a novelist, Daniela Alarcón, and his wife and partner, Carolina Guerrero. So they decided that they'd like to do, that they were hearing amazing storytelling radio in English, like This American Life, Snap Judgment, Radio Lab, and there just seemed to be nothing like this in Spanish. So this was their idea more than a year ago now, and they contacted me and another radio producer, Martina Castro. And so together the four of us founded Radio Ambulante. The idea was that we could sort of bring this out slowly. We can't obviously just start being distributed by several radio stations. So we decided to do a Kickstarter campaign. We had seen other amazing projects, documentaries, and so sort of socially minded projects do very well on Kickstarter. So we made a short video, and we, really availed ourselves of Facebook and Twitter in particular to make this not only a fundraising campaign, but sort of an educational push or even publicity to let people know that Radio Ambulante, it was on the way. And we were able to meet our goal, which was $40,000 within just a matter of weeks. And we actually surpassed our goal and made $46,000.
Who have been your biggest supporters?
It's a bit across the board. I think we have found incredible enthusiasm in Latin America from writers, journalists, literary magazines in Peru, also in Argentina, and a foundation for journalism based in Colombia. They have all been very supportive, and I think are eagerly awaiting the results of the last year's work.
You take pride in your team. Tell us more about them.
Well, I think it's a great team because we're bringing together different aspects of storytelling. Like I said, Daniel is a novelist and a journalist, and he has a great editorial sensibility. He will be sort of leading the way and shaping a lot of the tone of our content. And Martina Castro, she's affiliated with KALW. She works for Cross Currents, and she's done a lot of work for NPR, a lot of interviewing. She's a wonderful producer, and I've worked here as I'm no longer working as a street reporter, but for the last 5 years, I was really pretty much covering breaking news, but also my beat was officially and unofficially Latino immigrants in New York City. So I had a lot of like on the ground exposure to the issues that this population is facing. And finally, Carolina, who is our sort of director and manager, she is an entrepreneur, so she brought to the table, all the things that none of us knew how to do.
You say you have producers from all over the world. What countries specifically in Latin America do they come from?
Well, we have producers of varying levels of experience. I think because this style of radio doesn't yet exist in Latin America, there's also a training component to what we're doing. So we have people in, Argentina, Peru, Colombia, Mexico, all over the United States. We have immigrants throughout the United States. We have a producer and journalist in Spain, and we're hoping to, also reach into the Caribbean, not just stay, Central and South America.
How do you plan to reach a broader audience?
We can't sort of anticipate what the reactions will be, but I think we'd hope to sort of represent different regions, different cultures, also sort of untapped or less familiar sides of life in Latin America. We'd like to do, sort of women's stories, lesbian, gay, transgender stories, stories that don't get heard a lot, sometimes that could stand to sort of subvert some of the stereotypes about Latin America as well.
Are you able to continue this, paying your contributors financially after using these funds that you've gained through Kickstarters?
We hope so. Of course, it remains to be seen, but I think that's the most important thing. So even, whatever we need to do, we will make sure that our contributors are covered. I should note that we have produced episodes through the end of this year. So we have managed to not only pay for our first episode, but the later episodes. Our first episode will be launched online in 2 weeks, or I should say May 15th. And thereafter we will roll out other episodes. The theme of our first episode is mudanzas, which is movement, which is moving, migration, transfers, journeys, this sort of I think that there are several stories all around that theme.
Annie Coreal, thank you for being with us today.
Thank you so much.
You can hear more of the stories Radio Ambulante has covered on the website radioambulante.org.
Still to come, theater that speaks to the soul. And finally from us tonight, A new century-old Yiddish theater has reinvented itself to attract new audiences beyond the Jewish community. It's an effort to share its cultural legacy and remain relevant.
The National Yiddish Theater is currently running Soul to Soul, a cabaret of African American and Yiddish songs. Judith Escalona tells us more about this touring theater company that was part of the golden age of Yiddish theater on Manhattan's Lower East Side.
They're singing in Yiddish and English, hoping to draw parallels between the experiences of Eastern European Jews and African Americans. The show is called Soul to Soul, and it's one of the latest productions of the National Yiddish Theater. Zalmen Mlotek is an authority on Yiddish folk music. He is also the theater's musical director.
It's a look at what the African American community, musical cultural heritage, and the Jewish American cultural heritage have in common. And because the peoples have so much in common in terms of their own pursuits of freedom and liberty and justice, musically there are so many things that tied together.
The National Yiddish Theater was originally called Folksbiene, or the People's Stage, when it was founded in 1915 to serve the recently arrived Yiddish-speaking Jews from Eastern Europe. In 1998, they changed their name and updated their mission in response to the demographic changes in the Jewish community.
We're the last professional Yiddish theater in the country from a legacy that goes back to the turn of the century in the early teens and 20s, when there were 20 Yiddish theaters running simultaneously on the Lower East Side and in every major city in the United States. Our mission is not to conceive of Yiddish as a lingua franca anymore. It's really to make sure that what was created in Yiddish be transmitted in new ways.
Today, supertitles accompany each performance, making Yiddish theater accessible and relevant to new generations beyond its Yiddish-speaking public. That sometimes means teaching Yiddish to actors like Tony Perry, who is a journalist turned actor in the musical theater.
People at the Folksbiene who've been terrific about helping coach us. We're acting as a dialect coach and helping you to understand both how to express yourself in this other language and how to pronounce things in a way that makes sense to those who are native speakers.
The vast majority of Jews do not speak Yiddish. Magda Fishman is the cantor at the Temple Beth Am in Los Angeles. She is originally from Israel and also had to learn Yiddish.
My grandparents spoke at home Yiddish as their secret language, which made me not understand any word and made me very eager to want to know the language one day. So it was very natural for me to start through songs learning the language.
Elmore James is an opera singer who has sung in many languages worldwide, but Yiddish holds a special place for him.
I love working on the music. I sing in 9 languages, and so Yiddish is the 9th. And yeah, I love languages. I love differences. Some people like to be just around people like themselves. I like to be around different people. The more different, the better.
We wanted to have an opportunity to go past the Yiddish understanding and even the Jewish audience, to let all of New York and America know of this important legacy that we at the National Yiddish Theater are committed to making sure that people do not lose.
For Mlotek, the National Yiddish Theater is reinventing itself to appeal to a multicultural America. I'm Judith Escalona, Independent Sources.
That's our show this week. Thanks for staying tuned.
Till next time, be independent-minded.